PTF back with a world-class broadcaster who I'm very excited to hear his views about this year's Breeders' Cup Mile. He's going to be there. He is there in person, working for FanDuel TV, giving a view on the international runners and so much more. My buddy, Rishi Persad. Rishi, how are things?
Pete, it's great to hear you. Great to see you. It's all good. Enjoying my first couple of days at Del Mar. I am fascinated by all the chat about City of Troy, seeing the Aidan O'Brien horses, Charlie Appleby. But genuinely, and I say this with real feeling, I think the mile might be the race of the meeting for me. Those horses at the top of the market, the two fillies, Ramatuelle and Porta Fortuna, and Notable Speech. They all ran in the Guineas back in the springtime back in the UK in 1,000 or 2,000 guineas, and here we are in October heading to November, and they're still at the forefront of their respective divisions.
The Breeders' Cup is that much more special when you get the horses that run in those spring classics coming back in the fall. And boy, do we ever have that here in the classic with Fierceness and with Forever Young reprising that rivalry. And we've got a version of it here in the mile as well. Am I correct that it's a little bit of a surprise based on what we thought about the middle of this year to have such a deep European contingent with these three legit Group 1 runners coming over here? Were you surprised at just how strong this mile came up?
Well, it's funny you say that, because the two races at Newmarket back in the season, the 1,000 guineas and the 2,000 guineas, it's really interesting how people's take on those two races changed through the year. Originally, a lot of people thought that the 2,000 guineas might have been one of the best renewals we've ever seen, because they went hard, because of the quality of horses that we'd seen. We hadn't heard that much about Notable Speech going into the race. He was the winner. Rosalien, who finished second in that race, he was being pointed at the Breeders' Cup Mile as well. But unfortunately, he's picked up an injury and he's out. But probably one of the best milers around the world, I think. Such a shame he hasn't been able to finish his season. And then further in behind, you had, obviously City of Troy was disappointing on that day, but he's bounced back. And the 1,000 guineas wasn't seen in quite the same light as the 2,000 guineas in the immediate aftermath of the race. The 1,000 guineas, some people almost took as a bit of a freak result. El Malka won. But the horses in behind, there was good hope that they could be better in time. One or two had excuses on the day. But ultimately, both races have really held up very strong throughout the whole year. Multiple Group 1 winners out of both races have emerged. And as you say, it's great to see that form from back in the spring, April, May, being maintained through the season. One or two dips along the way for one or two horses, but ultimately it's proven to be a great guide for the rest of the year.
One of those dips has happened a couple of times. I was going to ask you about, for Notable Speech, some American viewers were actually surprised to see him in, especially some of the early guesses at what odds were going to be, the favorite that he was, given those notable blips on the radar. And I had to explain, but you see, when you got the Guineas and you've got, the premier summer mile, that's going to go a long way to determining markets. This is a new test for him. Tight left-handed bends. How do you think he's going to handle it? Are you concerned at all about those non-going days we've seen from Notable Speech?
It's got to be a little bit of a concern. You have to be fair to the horse and to what he's done, that he's obviously put together a really good profile. Don't forget, we hadn't even seen him till the start of the year. And then, of course, he won his couple of races on the all-weather pretty quickly, clocked some remarkable times. I think in his second race at Kempton on the all-weather, the last two furlongs of his second race, he clocked 21.79, finishing split for the last two furlongs. So, he always had a lot of ability and lots of raw speed, but he took that to a whole new level in winning the Guineas. And it looked as if he was going to take all before him, but he'd had quite a few runs in a short space of time. So the run at Ascot where he blew out is forgivable on the sense that he may have just had a little bit too much of a tough time in the early part of the season. Then he was given a break and he came back nicely and he won the Sussex Stakes in really good style against, I think, horses that at the time it looked a good race. Fact Cheval was in there. Fact Cheval's run really well on Champions Day again behind Sharon. And I'm prepared to forgive what happened in France last time out. Going into the race, the ground was a huge concern. Soft ground wasn't definitely going to suit him. Connections had actually said that before the race. Charlie Appleby made that clear. And then the way the race was run, that's put a line through that. Tribalist got away. Sharon couldn't even get him back. And then eventually, I think it's a race that anyone involved with Notable Speech, look, just forget that. Doesn't count. What does count, though, is how he settled into his environment here at Del Mar. Charlie Appleby has been at pains to say the real learning point about going to Paris was traveling him for the first time. And he felt that he learned a lot from that. And the early signs, having spoken to Charlie Appleby this very morning at Del Mar, are that he has settled in beautifully so far, and he's very happy with him. So positives. The tight turns, I'm less worried about that because he's such a good, strong traveller through his races. And I'm imagining, I have a look through the race, I think there's enough pace in there to suggest that they'll go well enough. He's drawn his 6 to have a lovely toe through the race. There are a lot of positives for his chances.
Yeah, that's some great information that I hadn't heard yet. And, Appleby, what does he know about winning Breeders' Cup races? He's only 10 for 20 and won this the last 3 years. So I think we can probably have a little bit of in Appleby we trust when it comes to the preparations for Notable Speech. If he wasn't going to excel, probably wouldn't be here, right? I mean, nobody's forcing him to run Notable Speech here.
No, absolutely. And the other point about it is that Notable Speech is probably, when you consider some of the other horses that Appleby's brought over, you mentioned those last 3 winners, Space Blues, Modern Games and Master of the Seas. Modern Games was a pretty good horse, probably the best of the 3 overall, a French 2,000 guineas winner, but he wasn't quite a Notable Speech. I think Notable Speech is a different level up. And this, I'd say, would be the best horse in terms of his high profile that Appleby's brought to this particular race. This is, it's a classic winner, 2,000 guineas winner. Yep. In the past, you're thinking about, okay, Space Blue sort of built himself up through as an older horse. Similar story with Master of the Seas. Modern Games was just tough. And of course, he'd had the experience of the Breeders' Cup the year before when, of course, he went in, didn't go out. And my bet didn't stand, annoyingly, with the bookmaker that I backed him at. So, but he'd had that experience, and so it was an automatic decision to come here. Whereas this horse, I think there's a little bit more weight carried. The fact that he's here suggests that he's done everything right in Charlie Appleby's head in terms of ticking the boxes for what he considers to be a proper Breeders' Cup horse. And again, talking to him this morning, quite often he mentioned in terms of like the 2-year-olds, the Alcudras and the Morris Cities, he's talking about physical appearance and how their physical conformation is suited to the Breeders' Cup racing. And with that in mind, you're talking about Notable Speech, and you're confident that his trainer knows that he'll go okay on the track.
Let's talk about the fillies in a compare and contrast mode. Looking at the form book would see maybe a superficial reading that Ramatuelle has something to find with Porta Fortuna. I'm contending that I feel like Ramatuelle might actually, nothing against Porta Fortuna, but just the way, as handy as she looks, might be one who's even better suited towards USA racing than Porta Fortuna. How do you separate? Do you buy that argument, and how do you separate the two?
I see that argument. Particularly as she seems to be a speedier filly. She's very good as a 2-year-old, very fast horse, Ramatuelle, and she probably was the best filly in the 1,000 guineas at Newmarket. Her rider obviously kicked for home, thinking he had the race. I think we all thought she was going to go and win a furlong and a half out, but she just tied up coming up that hill. It's that little part. If this was the strongest, or this was a stiff mile and this was a mile race where they had to race to the upper end of their stamina limit over a mile, I'd be quite concerned about her seeing out the trip because she's got quite a lot of speed. She won well last time. I know it was soft ground, but you have a look at the time in comparison to say, for example, the Guineas at Newmarket, you're talking about a race that runs at about 140. The race in France that she won is 120 and change. So I think she's just a quicker filly. And the contours of Del Mar's mile, I think, are more in her favour than any other mile you could possibly think of in the world. So that's a huge positive for her. Against that, with Porta Fortuna, you just have one of the most reliable racehorses, not just fillies, reliable racehorses on the planet. She's never been out of the first 3. Her last, all her runs this season and the last couple of back in the last season, all grade 1s. And she's in there. She's battling away. She nearly won the Guineas at Newmarket, and her subsequent runs at Ascot and in Ireland and Newmarket have been terrific. How could you not be appreciative of her ability? I find it very hard to split the two. But if they do go a good gallop, which I think they will, considering who the horses are in the field, I just have a feeling that Ramatuelle in the last 50 yards might just run out of gas. I know it sounds ridiculous. People might say you're talking garbage, but I just don't have the confidence in her strength over a strongly run proper mile race as I would a Notable Speech or
Right.
a Porta Fortuna, maybe even a Diego Velasquez. Just that last 50 to 100 yards, I'll be worrying that she might empty out.
Mike, I get it for sure. My counter argument would only be this is the opposite of a testing mile with the two turns and the tight two turns and just the configuration of Del Mar. But we'll see. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. Let's talk about some of the other runners we have let's talk about the home team before we get to any of the more internationals. From the right draw, I might have tried to tell you a story about Carl Spackler in this race. I hate the far outside for him. I think he's going to have to go forward, be tested all the way. And then we have Johannes, who's one of the best Southern California turf horses we've seen in quite some time. Do you see anything in the past performances that make you think either of them or any of the other Americans might be up to this kind of a task?
Well, it's how they're going to be ridden. I mean, I think Carl Spackler has the ability. So the race he won last time, where obviously Mountain Bear ended up finishing third, Kikuli got into all sorts of trouble, stumbled. I have a little question mark about how smooth his run was in comparison to some of the others. So I see why he's obviously a credible contender, but as you mentioned as well, drawn 12, that's awkward. Johannes was the one of the domestic team that I was interested in, primarily because he's put together such a lovely profile. And you also don't know just where the depths of his ability are. And I feel that he was the one that perhaps just offered a little bit more scope against the Europeans. You know, what is he, 4 from 4 this season? So I thought he was out of the two, given obviously he's in 9 in comparison to 12. And I just felt that Carl Spackler was probably flattered a little bit when he won last time because of the shenanigans that happened with him. So I thought Johannes would have been the one if I had to look for an alternative to the European runners.
Japan have such a strong group at this year's Breeders' Cup. I've actually heard some wise guy attention for Geoglyph in this race. I was thinking it looked like it was going to be too sharp for him. Do you think he's a serious contender?
Exactly that. I mean, I remember being in Dubai when he ran in the World Cup over 10 furlongs on dirt. And you go through all this form. The best of it is really over a mile and a quarter. And he's even stretched out to a mile and a half, as I'm sure you're all aware. And just don't think that at a mile, he's also, I'm just thinking of the speed of this race. And you've talked about the fact that this is a quicker mile. And if Ramatuelle is going to get the mile, a strongly run mile anywhere, it's going to be here because it's a quicker mile. So given all those factors, I think Geoglyph is going to struggle with the very fastest horses in the race. I mentioned being able to do 2 furlongs in 21.79 seconds for, Notable Speech. Is there anything in Geoglyph's record that says he's capable of doing something like that?
Yeah, I don't really think so. I'm going to have a word from the sponsor of this video, Rishi. We're going to come back for your verdict on the race and maybe one other thought that you have on it. But I do want to thank our friends at Twin Spires for sponsoring this video. They are back in the tournaments game in a big way. You can play the Breeders' Cup betting challenge at twinspires.com. You can also start feeding and qualifying for horse race betting competition's latest major, the return of the guaranteed $250,000 Kentucky Derby betting challenge. Go to twinspires.com and navigate over to their tournaments menu for all the information. Rishi, let's talk about your idea of the winner of this race.
I am going to go with a very tried and trusted formula for this race. Godolphin Blue, Charlie Appleby, William Buick, by the side Dubawi, tick, 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 tick for Notable Speech. Add into the fact that I don't think it matters to him how the race is run in terms of strength of pace, because I think he's the fastest. He's got the fastest turn of foot of anything in the race. If they go hard, as they did in the Guineas back in Newmarket, he's got a telling turn of foot in those circumstances. If they sprint, he's got the ability to quicken up and go past them because he's a very quick horse. I think all in all, he's the solid selection, but I'll throw one horse that I think should not be ruled out. And if I was playing the exactors, this is the horse that I would put in, and that is Diego Velasquez. Okay, his form doesn't quite match up to the fillies, doesn't quite match up to Notable Speech. But in his career, he's had 8 starts. Out of those 8 starts, he's run left-handed over a mile 3 times. All 3 times at Leopardstown, admittedly, a stiffer mile, yes. But on all 3 occasions, he emerged successful, including last time out where he put up one of his best performances of his career. And in that race was Maljum. Maljum was behind Notable Speech in the Sussex Stakes. So it doesn't put him that far away from a notable speech. So guess what? He's going left-handed over a mile on fast ground for the 4th time in his career. I give him a shot at being the one that notable speech has to gun down in the home straight.
Great stuff. Aidan O'Brien, no stranger to winning this race at a price either. Rishi, great stuff as always. Have fun out there. Eat a fish taco for me.
I will eat as many as you'd like, Pete. Honestly, I cannot wait.